Many have identified a direct link between the natural sciences and Russian nihilism. The toxicity of the will to truth was portrayed by Turgenev in Fathers and Sons. The book is far from a purely imaginative novel. The faith of the protagonist of the novel in scientific materialism is a typical attitude of Russian nihilists of the time. Russian nihilism is a historical example of what happens when the common person, who lacks logical discipline and any sort of philosophical background, gains access to scientific studies. It is an example of what happens when science is embraced before existential thinking has been cultivated. The idea goes that scientific knowledge should be accessible to all, and the more society becomes acquainted with science, the more liberal and critical it gets. Unfortunately, there is a flaw in this argument. In best-case scenario, such critical thinking goes only insofar as to undermine dominant ideologies, superstitions, bad conventions, and so on. In other words, at most, critical thinking achieves what Bazarov refers to as the inverted commonplace. However, as with all things, once science becomes popular, it becomes yet another idol for the crowd. The path that Russian society took in the midst of such scientific awakening was what became known as nihilism. So, what had gone wrong in Russia? Vasily Botkin identified the issue when, in 1857, he wrote to Tolstoy in a letter that people who had never held a book in their lives were all of a sudden starting to read things that they couldn't get their minds around. One of these books that circulated widely in Russia was Ludwig Büchner's Kraft und Stoff. Incidentally, this book was emphatically mentioned by Turgenev in Fathers and Sons for the role it played in Russian nihilism. Büchner reduced everything to force and matter. As the Alex Rosenberg of his day, Büchner promoted science as far as force and matter physically allowed him. Despite his benign efforts, such attempts had dire consequences. Büchner was not a metaphysician, yet his ideas gained philosophical significance. What was the issue? Well, when the commoner hears the word force, no amount of scientific clarity will make it clear to them how that concept needs to be understood materialistically, and how it should not be incorporated within a metaphysical theory, something that Büchner's rhetoric did nothing to help with. It is completely irrelevant that a term such as mass is more scientific than matter. If we took to the streets and distributed some scientific article in which the concept of mass was discussed, chances would be that most people would read the article without having any grounded understanding of the concept of mass. Consequently, it would not be unlikely that the person would treat both concepts as if they were interchangeable, the only difference being one of terminological degree. Many a time I have heard bizarre and outlandish arguments in favor of mysticism, astral projection, theosophy, and other such fantasies from people who just happened to have read a couple of books on quantum mechanics or the multiverse. The issue subsists beyond reading a book or two. Even more disconcerting is the fact that the belief in and understanding of science do not necessarily correlate. What I am suggesting is that not only does scientific and logical training not help the general public, but also it leads the public towards nihilism, because the message the public might take from such courses could be in the form of accepting and worshipping science as the sole path to truth and well-being. And as the example of Kraft und Stoff illustrated, the public might do this without having any understanding of what they are actually advocating and believing.